I'm Katie Duzick, Regional Program Representative with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
And I am Liz Redon, Regional Program Representative covering the Willamette Valley for the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
And we are here today to provide you with an overview of our open solicitation program. We hope to familiarize our partners, grantees, and applicants with the program parameters and give you some information about how our program works.
All right, so Katie, what exactly is open solicitation?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Liz. That's an important question. Our open solicitation program accepts applications from any eligible applicant. We accept technical assistance, restoration, and stakeholder engagement applications twice a year, and monitoring applications once a year. To dive a little bit into the history of our grant program, it is our longest running grant program. We've been funding these projects in some capacity for over 35 years, beginning in 1987 with the Governor's Watershed Enhancement Board, when our very first restoration grant was awarded. Some milestones along the way: in response to the salmon decline in the 1990s, Oregonians came together to write the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds in 1997. This was a really pivotal document that really set down some of the tenets for how we're going to do restoration work in Oregon. So in 1998, we got a dedicated stream of funding with the passage of Measure 66, which dedicated a portion of lottery funds to the grant programs. And OWEB came into being in its current capacity in 1999 when it transitioned from GWEB. Over the years, we transitioned a bit from salmon-focused restoration, which was born in that 1990 salmon decline, as I mentioned, and we adopted a more ridgetop to ridgetop approach to our funding. We started funding technical assistance grants in 2001, and a really significant milestone for our agency and for watershed restoration in Oregon was the passage of Measure 76, which made that dedicated source of funding permanent. In 2018, we funded our first stakeholder engagement grants. One thing that changed with Measure 76 was that it did change how we fund education and outreach. And our stakeholder engagement program was born of that change, which links engagement and outreach work to restoration and acquisition projects directly. Looking back through OWEB's history, we have funded since 1997 over $300 million in restoration grants. Our technical assistance and monitoring investments are at $28 and $29 million respectively, and our consortium of education, outreach, and stakeholder engagement grants is just around $16 million. So this represents a significant investment.
Can you tell me more about who sets priorities for open solicitation?
Oh, everybody always wants to know that, Liz. And the answer is that OWEB does not set the priorities for open solicitation. In keeping with the grassroots nature of the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds, local practitioners and conservation entities set the priorities, and they bring them to us and tell us what's important to do in their own watersheds.
So what makes open solicitation so unique?
I'm proud to say, along with many of my colleagues, that our open solicitation program is highly innovative. Our review teams don't shy away from recommending projects for funding that employ cutting-edge science, such as process-based restoration techniques, beaver dam analogs, to name a few. We also provide funding opportunities that consider all of the work that it takes to put a project on the ground. So we understand that projects don't appear out of thin air, and we have opportunities like stakeholder engagement to allow applicants and grantees to get out and talk to neighbors of restoration projects and get support for a project. We have two types of technical assistance funding, one for planning and one for project design. And all of this together provides the ability for grantees to put together a full package. And a lot of funders like to fund more shovel-ready type projects. And we understand that it can sometimes take a little more to get to that point.
Absolutely.
Our grant program is also fairly high frequency. So we have an offering every 6 months with open solicitation, which is a pretty fast turnaround when you consider the scope of the projects that we are putting on the ground. This provides applicants with a chance to come to us twice a year. We also are an influential program. The level of investment that we talked about over 35 years has really put OWEB at the forefront of creating some of the guidelines around wetland and riparian habitat restoration. I'm going to pivot a little bit here and talk about the process of applying for a grant. So this grant is a grant refers to the fact that every OWEB grant, regardless of which offering it's from, follows the same process from solicitation through to implementation through to reporting. And I'm going to focus on what happens when we put the solicitation out and what happens when you apply.
Great. Well, can you tell me about who can apply for open solicitation grants?
Any eligible applicant can apply for open solicitation grants, which is one of the neat things about this offering. Applicants that are eligible to apply for OWEB funds include watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, nonprofits, tribes, schools, community colleges, the institutions of higher education, and also local municipalities, like technically political subdivisions of the state that aren't state and federal agencies. State and federal agencies are not eligible to apply, but the good thing is you can apply as a co-applicant with another eligible applicant. Individuals are not eligible to apply for OWEB funds.
So what kind of projects are eligible for funding? What can I do with OWEB funds?
Well, the good news is we define that in rule, so it's very easy to tell if your project is eligible. We look to see if the project demonstrates sound principles of watershed management, whether the project uses methods that are adapted to the project locale, whether it complies with state land use planning goals, and it needs to follow professionally accepted restoration approaches that result in ecological or watershed benefits. So looking at all of this, you're probably thinking, wow, that's a pretty broad brush of eligibility, and you're correct. We do make a pretty big box of what is eligible for our open solicitation program.
So what is ineligible?
That is also defined in rule, fortunately, and it gets a little more specific when we're talking about ineligibility. There's a number of specific actions that are called out that are not eligible for OWEB funds. And those, as seen here, are construction of water storage structures that aren't related to watershed restoration. Fish screening projects that could get funding elsewhere, such as through the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Projects that are constructed solely to comply with enforcement or mitigation, routine project maintenance, and then water conservation projects that might not have water quality benefits.
So Katie, how can OWEB staff help me with my project idea and my application? What can you do to help me?
Well, we are happy to help you. So you're an eligible applicant, you've got an eligible project, that's a really good start. A good next step is to reach out to your regional program representative, and you can find that in a map on our website with their contact information. And OWEB staff are poised to help flesh out projects. We can sometimes do a pre-application site visit if it's necessary or helpful. We can advise applicants on what the best pathway is to funding. Sometimes applicants want to know whether they need to apply for a technical assistance grant before doing restoration. And that really depends on the site and the project. And we'll probably ask questions about the complexity of the site, what kind of data is available, and help figure out if that's a necessary or prudent step. Sometimes applicants want to know whether they should apply for a technical assistance grant or a stakeholder engagement grant because they might have elements of both in their project, and we can help figure out the best choice to have the best chance at being successful with our grant programs. We also can help with the online application system, which is pretty user-friendly, but it can occasionally present some difficulties or challenges for folks who are new to the system. OWEB staff are able to look at your application in draft form through the back end of our application system, and we can help troubleshoot any problems and provide some tips and tricks to getting a successful submission.
All right, so what I really want to know is what is the chances of being successful in getting an OWEB grant?
Well, I thought you might ask that, so I went ahead and crunched some numbers. And from 2005 to 2021, it looks like applicants had about a 56% chance of success of both being recommended for funding and making it above the funding line, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So basically, you're looking at a little more than half.
All right, so how much money should I ask for? What is too much?
That is the magic question that everybody wants to know the answer to. How much money should you ask for? And the answer is that you should ask for however much money you need to accomplish your ecological goals and objectives of your project. And then the review team will evaluate the cost effectiveness of that with the expected ecological benefits. And I understand that that's a little unsatisfying. So oftentimes I like to share with prospective applicants the average award amount for our grant programs. And right now, our restoration grants are averaging a little over $200,000 per award. Our technical assistance grants are around $62,000, but it's important to note that there is currently a cap of $75,000 on our technical assistance grants. However, our board is looking at caps and a cap on that program specifically, and so that could change. So please reach out to your regional program representative before applying to find out the latest on caps. Now, this average award amount information can just be helpful in determining how much you should ask for to be consistent with our program and set up your best chance of success. So I'm going to pivot now to ask you some questions in your area of expertise. We're going to move on to what it looks like in the review process. And so I was hoping you might be able to tell me how my application is going to be reviewed when I apply.
Great, Katie. I'd be happy to talk about the next steps. So we are going to move down our grant as a grant diagram. And the next steps that all grant applications must complete is an application review and award process. And of course, we have a diagram to explain this process.
I thought you might have a diagram.
This diagram is a translation of the application review process described in administrative rules. The first step after the application deadline is a process for the 6 review teams in each region of the state to provide a recommendation to staff. This includes reviewing the application, attending site visits for the projects, and a review team meeting. The review teams are something that are unique and special about how OWEB reviews grant applications. Watersheds are complicated places, and reviewing the diverse projects that are proposed requires knowledge about so many topics, including hydrology, geology, fluvial geomorphology, ecology, biology, rangeland science, just to name a few. And OWEB staff cannot have all the expertise needed to evaluate all these projects well and give them the attention they deserve. So we have volunteers in each region that collectively have this knowledge and help us learn about the projects. Here you see a list of organizations that have generously allowed their staff to commit significant time to the OWEB review process. The result is something that puts the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds into practice when we review our applications by convening local relevant knowledge and expertise in each region. Getting back to the review steps, after we receive applications, staff and reviewers visit the project sites. Site visits provide an opportunity to see the projects within the context of their landscape and to hear the applicant describe the project in their own voice. This provides a different way to learn about the projects and to get clear about what is being proposed in the application. Watershed restoration is an evolving science. We are writing the manual as we invest in these projects. The review process allows us an opportunity to learn together about what is working and not working through conversations between the applicants and the reviewers. And the site visits are a great place to have these conversations together. After we visit all the projects and field visits, we lock these reviewers into a room for a day, and they have the hard task of evaluating each of the project applications. First, they evaluate each project individually, and then they rank the projects that are recommended into a priority order. That ranked list of projects becomes the recommendation to staff. OWEB staff facilitate these conversations using visual tools like this one, and here's a diagram translating evaluation criteria from the administrative rule. And we have a diagram for each of the grant types, including technical assistance, stakeholder engagement, and monitoring. Reviewers use these criteria to evaluate each project individually. The criteria are used to identify the attributes that are indicating there's a weight of evidence that the project is likely to succeed, or to identify elements that need to be addressed. This is what we document in the evaluations to the staff report to the board. Then reviewers are asked to take the list of recommended projects and rank them in priority order. And here's another visual aid that we use to help the reviewers remember what should be considered when ranking the projects according to administrative rule. And this includes things like how well the project meets those evaluation criteria that we saw in a previous diagram, the certainty of success for the project meeting its ecological objectives that are expected, how well the project will provide benefits according to the Oregon Plan for salmon and watersheds, and then also the cost benefit of the project. This brings us to the center portion of our decision path where staff creates a recommendation to the board. We write the evaluations to give the board members and applicants a summary of what reviewers learned and provide an explanation of those project attributes that were discussed that led to each project recommendation. Staff looks at the spending plan approved by the board to determine how much funds are available for us to spend. And then we also reference those evaluations to inform where to draw the funding line in each region to target the projects that have the greatest likelihood of success in achieving watershed restoration outcomes. Which brings us to the final step where we present the recommendation to the board to make the awards. I often surprise people when presenting this pathway when I say that neither the teams nor the staff have the power to award funds. We instead provide a recommendation to the board based on what we learned about the application, the site visit, and review meeting conversation, and using the criteria from rules throughout these steps to evaluate those projects.
So why did my project get a do not fund recommendation?
That is a very good question, and it is always hard to get a do not fund recommendation because of how it can impact the project in moving forward. And there are a number of reasons why a project may receive a do not fund recommendation. First, it may not be clear how the project will provide a watershed benefit. The statute that authorizes OWEB to fund grants from lottery indicates projects must be used to implement the mission of the Oregon Plan to restore the watersheds of Oregon. Statute also indicates that any project that the board approves for funding must provide a public benefit by supporting improved water quality, native fish and wildlife habitat, or watershed or ecosystem function. So it is important for an application to clearly connect the proposed actions with the expected watershed benefits from those actions. Second, there may not have been a clear indicators documented in the application that the project is likely to succeed. Because the application becomes the scope of work for the grant agreement, it is really important that it clearly describes the proposed restoration project. Just like a house remodel, you would want details about what will be done, where it will be done, the timeline for completion, and what it will cost so that there's a common understanding of the expected outcomes from that investment. Finally, a project may not get funded because it fell below the funding line that you referenced earlier in our conversation. So I did some number crunching also, and I looked at board materials since 2005 to compare the funding that has been available compared to what was requested in grant applications over time. The light green shading in the diagram is the total funds requested in each biennium, and the dark green shading is the funds that were available. And as you can see, OWEB has never been able to afford every dollar that was requested in our grant applications. And the percentage again of the resulting number of applications that were funded are exactly what you found, around half. We can afford around half of the projects.
So given that, why isn't there more of an opportunity to respond to the review team questions? How do I respond if I want to ask a follow-up?
Great question. If OWEB had enough funds for every project, we could have a process that focuses on addressing review team concerns and questions, and then funding every project as long as they pass that watershed benefit threshold that's described in the statute. However, as we've learned, there's not enough money for every project that is requested, and we are limited to a 6-month cycle to complete the review process. We do not have enough time for additional feedback loops within that 6-month period. So instead, we balance process with opportunity by having 2 cycles a year. This allows applicants to have opportunity to apply again more quickly, and they can use the evaluation feedback to address review team questions and concerns. The 2 cycles a year provides that opportunity to respond to review comments without needing to wait for an annual application cycle to apply again.
Makes sense.
So now we are at our final parts of our grant as a grant diagram, and we are going to move to grant agreement and reporting. And this is where project implementation finally occurs.
So when I'm implementing my project, what happens if something goes awry or not as planned and I end up needing more time for my project?
Great question. And yes, watershed restoration can be unpredictable. During implementation, staff support grantees in meeting grant agreement requirements by using tools to be adaptive to the unpredictability of implementing watershed projects. We can do things like time extensions if more time is needed, and budget amendments if funds need to be adjusted among the budget categories. Just to name a couple of examples of how staff can help grantees implement their projects.
So another question for you, Liz. Why is there so much reporting with OWEB grants?
That is a fair question, and this brings us to the final step of our grant as a grant process. And we do collect a lot of reporting information, and it can feel like a lot of data gathering from OWEB. But OWEB does use this information to report to the legislator, and also to OWEB's funders like NOAA Fisheries and others. It is important to document how public funding was spent because voters overwhelmingly approved spending lottery funds on watershed restoration. We need to ensure we are meeting and honoring those voter expectations. Reporting data helps us to tell the story about how Measure 66 and then 76 had led to restoring Oregon's watersheds. So finally, to wrap up our Open Solicitation 101 conversation, just a couple final comments. I want to again highlight that watershed restoration is an evolving science. The Open Solicitation offering has allowed us to collaboratively learn and adapt restoration techniques. The review feedback loop among reviewers, OWEB staff, and applicants has led to innovation and improvements that you noted earlier in our conversation. Things like understanding that restoration projects cannot spontaneously combust on the landscape without investing in capacity, technical assistance, and stakeholder engagement that funds the people to develop relationships, partnerships, recruit additional funding, design projects, and generally ensure there's a team of people pushing that rock up the hill together. Without these investments, the restoration cannot occur. Also, understanding that we can't just plant trees and walk away, but need to allow applicants to request funding for long-term care and feeding until plants are free to grow, so the restoration investment can effectively provide watershed benefits. These are just a couple examples of how Open Solicitation has improved watershed restoration in Oregon. And with each cycle, we will continue to learn together to better understand watershed restoration, adapt, and tell the story of Oregon's voluntary model for restoring our watersheds.
Well, it was great talking with you today, Liz.
Thank you, Katie. Same to you.
And thank you for joining our conversation about Open Solicitation 101. We hope this has helped shed some light on some of the aspects of our program. If you have any questions or would like to submit a grant to our Open Solicitation program, please reach out to your regional program representatives who are shown here. Thank you.